how a single lie fractures the soul and creates a veil between the human and the divine. Imagine your soul as a vessel of pure light. Every time a lie escapes your lips, a drop of ink falls into that water. At first, it's a swirl of gray, barely noticeable, but as the lies accumulate, the water turns black. You can no longer see through it, and more importantly, the light can no longer pass through it. This is the disastrous sin, not just because of the harm it does to others, but because of the cage it builds around you. Spiritually, truth is a high-frequency vibration. It aligns with the universe, with the Creator, and with your higher self. Lying is a jagged, dissonant frequency. When you lie, you create a split in your reality. You are forced to maintain two worlds, the real one and the fabricated one. This requires an immense amount of spiritual energy that should have been used for growth, love, and creativity. Instead, you waste your life force acting as a guard for a prison of your own making. There is a profound spiritual peace, often called sakina or tranquility, that only visits the heart of the truthful. The liar is perpetually restless. They are haunted by the fear of being found out. This anxiety is a spiritual signal that you are out of alignment. You cannot meditate, you cannot pray with sincerity, and you cannot find stillness when your tongue is at war with your heart. To understand the disaster of lying, we must first understand the sanctity of trust. Trust is the invisible glue of the human experience. It is what allows us to sleep at night, to trade currency, to love a partner, and to follow a leader. In the spiritual realm, trust is a form of amana, a divine trust. When you speak a word, you are issuing a spiritual currency. When you lie, you are committing counterfeiting. You are handing someone a coin that looks like gold but is made of lead. At first, you might feel clever. You got what you wanted without paying the price of truth. But look closely at what happens to the market of your life. When a community or a relationship is flooded with counterfeit words, the value of all words begins to drop. This is the first stage of social decay, the inflation of meaninglessness. A lie is rarely a sudden explosion. It is more like a colony of termites. If you walk into an old house that has been infested, the walls might look solid. The paint is fresh, the structure looks grand. But touch a beam and your finger sinks through the wood. It has been hollowed out from the inside. This is what lying does to a family or a friendship. You may sit at the same dinner table. You may share the same bed. You may work in the same office. But the substance of the connection is gone. The disaster is that by the time you realize the trust is gone, the structure is already beyond repair. This is why many spiritual traditions classify lying not just as a mistake, but as a disaster, because it destroys the foundation of human cooperation. Without truth, we are not a society. We are just a collection of individuals hiding from one another. One of the most profound psychological and spiritual punishments for the sin of lying is what I call the dark mirror. There is a spiritual law that says we see the world not as it is, but as we are. When you become a person who lies, you lose the ability to believe anyone else. Because you know how easy it is to manufacture a smile while harboring a grudge, you assume everyone else is doing the same. Because you know how easy it is to manipulate facts for personal gain, you believe every act of kindness from another person is a hidden trap. The liar eventually creates a hell of their own making, a world where they are, surrounded by imaginary enemies. They become hypervigilant, paranoid, and cynical. They lose the fitra, the natural, pure state of a child who believes in the goodness of others. To live a life where you cannot trust your neighbor, your spouse, or your brother is a state of spiritual exile. You are physically present, but socially and emotionally isolated. The betrayal of the self-concept. We often think lying is something we do to others. But the most disastrous social consequence is what it does to your own reputation. Not the reputation others see, but the one you see in the mirror. Every time you lie, you send a message to your subconscious. The real me is not good enough. The truth of my situation is unacceptable. I must hide. This creates a deep-seated sense of shame. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. When you live in a state of perpetual lying, you are living in a state of perpetual shame. This shame makes you pull away from people who are genuinely good because their light hurts your eyes. You begin to seek out other shadow people, those who also live in deception. You build a social circle of ghosts where no one is real and no one is safe. To tell the truth is effortless. It is the natural state of the human brain. When you speak the truth, you are simply reporting what is stored in your memory. However, the moment you decide to lie, your brain must perform a complex series of high-energy tasks. This is known as cognitive load. First, your brain must suppress the truth, a process called inhibitory control. Then it must fabricate a plausible alternative reality that doesn't contradict what the listener already knows. Finally, it must store this false memory alongside the real one to ensure you don't get caught later. This process happens in the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of your brain. When you lie frequently, you are essentially overclocking your mental processor. This leads to chronic mental fatigue, irritability, and a decreased ability to make complex decisions. You are literally making yourself less intelligent by choosing to be dishonest. The stress response and the amygdala. Every lie triggers a micro-stress event. Even if you think you are a good liar, your brain's emotional center, the amygdala, fires off a warning signal. This is the fear response. Your body releases cortisol and adrenaline, the chemicals of flight or fight. When lying becomes a habit, your body is bathed in these stress hormones 24/7. This is why the disastrous sin often manifests as physical illness, high blood pressure, digestive issues, and chronic insomnia. You aren't just hiding a secret from the world, you are keeping your body in a state of permanent biological emergency. Your nervous system was designed for peace, not for the constant surveillance required to maintain a web of deceit. The erosion of self-concept. Psychologically, we all have a self-concept, an internal story of who we are. For a healthy person, this story is, I am a person of integrity. When you lie, you create a self-concept discrepancy. You begin to experience cognitive dissonance. You see yourself as a good person, but your actions are those of a fraud. To survive this mental pain, the mind often resorts to dangerous defense mechanisms. You might start gaslighting others to make your lie feel true, or you might become emotionally numb to avoid feeling the guilt. Over time, this leads to a fragmented personality. You become a collection of masks with no face underneath. The disaster here is the loss of the true self. You forget who you are because you have spent so much time pretending to be who you are not. The desensitization trap. The brain has a terrifying ability to adapt. Studies in NEU. Raw science show that the more we lie, the less our amygdala responds to the act of lying. The first big lie feels like a stab in the heart. The 100th lie feels like nothing. This is the slippery slope of deception. Once the brain is desensitized, the moral compass is essentially broken. You no longer lie for a reason, you lie by default. This is the point of psychological no return, where the person becomes a pathological liar. At this stage, the sin has completely colonized the mind, leading to a total breakdown of empathy. Since you have lied to yourself so effectively, you can no longer feel the pain your lies cause others. The death of intuition. Truth and intuition are deeply linked. When you are honest, your gut feeling is sharp because you are in tune with reality. But a liar lives in a manufactured reality. By constantly feeding your brain false data, you ruin your own internal GPS. Liars often find themselves making terrible life choices, choosing the wrong partners, the wrong investments, or the wrong friends. Why? Because they have trained their brains to ignore the truth. When you lose the ability to speak the truth, you lose the ability to sense the truth. You become blind in a world of shadows, unable to navigate the complexities of life because you have broken your own internal compass. History is often taught through the lens of wars and economics. But if you look closer, every major collapse of human civilization was preceded by a crisis of truth. When we study the fall of empires, from the Roman Empire to the dynasties of the East, find a recurring pattern. The leadership began to lie to the people, and the people began to lie to themselves. When a government or an institution begins to prioritize optics over reality, they enter a state of systemic deception. They report false harvest numbers, they hide the rot in their treasuries, and they mask the weakness of their borders with propaganda. The disastrous sin at this scale becomes a form of collective suicide. Because they are operating on false data, they make fatal decisions. They walk into wars they cannot win and ignore crises they cannot afford to overlook. The ruin of a nation is almost always built upon a foundation of unaddressed lies. The science of manipulation, propaganda, and the masses. In the 20th century, we saw the ultimate manifestation of lying as a weapon of mass destruction. We saw how the big lie, a lie so colossal that no one would believe that someone could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously, could lead to the deaths of millions. This is the spiritual disaster of lying taken to its logical extreme. When a society abandons truth, it loses its soul. Lying at a global level requires the dehumanization of others. To sell a lie that leads to war, you must first lie about the humanity of your neighbor. You must create a false narrative that turns brothers into enemies. This is why the great spiritual teachers of history warned that lying is the root of all evil. Because without a lie, you cannot convince a good man to do an evil thing. The environmental echo, lying to nature, the ripple effect of dishonesty extends even to the ground we walk on. We are currently living through a global environmental crisis that is, at its heart, a crisis of honesty. For decades, the disastrous sin was committed by powerful interests who knew the truth about the planet's health, but chose to bury it for the sake of short-term profit. When we lie about our impact on the world does not lie back. Nature has no propaganda. It operates on the absolute truth of cause and effect. If we poison the water and say it is clean, we still get sick. If we destroy the forests and say we are developing, the air still thins. This is the ultimate lesson of the ripple effect. You can lie to humans, and you can lie to yourself, but you cannot lie to the laws of the universe. The disastrous sin eventually meets the unbreakable reality, and the collision is always catastrophic. The intergenerational curse, perhaps the most tragic ripple effect of lying, is the legacy we leave for the next generation. When children grow up in a world where truth is subjective and convenience is king, they lose the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is manufactured. We are seeing a spiritual inheritance of cynicism. If the father lies about his taxes and the mother lies to her neighbors, the child learns that life is a game of masks. This erodes the very concept of the hero. A hero is someone who stands for truth, even when it costs them everything. In a world of lies, there are no heroes, only survivors. By committing the sin of lying, we are effectively stealing the moral compasses of our grandchildren, leaving them to navigate a dark sea without a North Star. Redemption does not begin with a grand gesture, it begins with a whisper. It starts with the moment you stop running and turn to face the shadow you've created. In many spiritual traditions, this is called tauba, repentance, or metanoia, a change of mind. It is the act of radical honesty. The first step toward healing is the surgical confession. You must look into the mirror and say, I have lied. You must stop calling them mistakes, misunderstandings, or exaggerations. You must call it what it is. This is painful because it shatters the ego, but it is the only way to let the light back in. Just as a wound cannot heal until the infection is drained, the soul cannot heal until the lie is extracted. Rebuilding the altar of integrity. Once you have cleared the space, you must begin the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. Integrity is not a destination, it is a muscle. You build it by choosing the truth in the smallest, most insignificant moments. The small truths: if you are 5 minutes late, don't blame the traffic, admit you left late. The courage to say no. Many lies are born from the fear of disappointing others. By practicing the honest no, you protect your soul from the false yes, the restoration of trust. Understand that while you can be forgiven instantly by the divine, human trust is earned back in drops. You must be patient. You must accept that people may not believe you for a long time, and you must stay truthful anyway. Your truth should not be a performance for others. It should be a gift to yourself, the spiritual reward, the unshakable heart. What happens when you become a person of absolute truth? You gain a superpower of fearlessness. A liar is always looking over their shoulder. A truthful person stands on solid rock. When you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. You can look anyone in the eye, from the beggar on the street to the king on his throne, because you are not protecting a fake version of yourself. This is the Sakina, tranquility we spoke of in part 1. Your internal world and your external world become one. This alignment creates a spiritual shield that protects you from the anxieties of the world. The return to the fitra, pure state, living in truth, is a return to your fitra, your original pure nature. We were born to be truthful. When you return to this state, you find that your intuition returns. Your prayers feel heard. Your relationships become deeper because they are finally based on reality, not a script. The disastrous sin is a heavy burden, but the moment you drop it, you realize how light you were meant to be. You begin to see the beauty in the world again because your eyes are no longer clouded by the smoke of deception. Become a woman, a person who is a sanctuary of safety for others, because they know that your word is as certain as the rising sun. The final call, choose the light. The path of the liar is a downward spiral into darkness, isolation, and decay. The path of the truthful is an upward climb toward clarity, peace, and divine proximity. Every word you speak today is a brick. You are either building a prison or a temple. The disaster of the past can be wiped away by the sincerity of the present. Do not wait for a better time to be honest. The truth is not a luxury. It is your life force. Rise up. Speak the truth. Be real. And watch as the universe opens doors that your lies could never even find.